If I was to die today, would I be happy with what I've done? And I can honestly say that I have. I feel like I have left enough for the world for people to take over what I'm doing and to take it far, far further than I have. I feel like I have loved with all of my heart. And that has always been so important to me, that I can feel free enough to be able to love in a way which I've always wanted to be loved. And the ancient Egyptians, they would always say there was this little thing where they would weigh the heart. Was it as, are you as heavy as a feather, or as light as a feather, as heavy as the heart? And, if your heart was light, that was where you went through. But their question was, have you brought joy, and have you felt joy? Have you given the world joy, and have you experienced joy? Very, very simple questions.
Well, this isn't embarrassing at all. 2.5 years ago, I recorded this podcast with Veda Austin. 2.5 years ago. At the time, the reception was not very good, or should I say connection, the internet connection. There was a significant lag time. So it ended up that we talked over each other quite a bit. And I remembered thinking I need to do a lot of editing to make it presentable and worth listening to, because there was just a lot of lags and delays, and I wasn't happy with it. And I wasn't very good at editing at the time. And I put it off. I put it off for so long, I kind of forgot about it. And now and again, I would come across Veda Austin and her work, and I'd be like, oh man, I did a podcast with her. I had to dig it up. And I'd forget about it again. But this time, I've dusted off the files, and I've found the podcast episode. I've tidied it up, and here we are. Now, folks, you may remember that since the beginning of this year, I've been putting out the first half of the podcast for free, and the second half is behind a paywall. Prior to that, the way it worked was 1 in 3 podcasts were behind a paywall. Now, I actually, when I did the podcast with Veda, promised her that this podcast would not be behind a paywall. I'm going to keep my word. Yes, 2.5 years have gone by, but I'm not going to break my word, because I think that's really important. And I've actually got an email. Here we go. Saturday, the February 10th of 2024. I wrote, I've gifted you a subscription to my Substack. Your episode will not be behind a paywall. Everyone needs to hear it. So, yeah, I'm going to keep my word. Now, folks, if you go to my Substack, you'll find Veda's CMP guide, the 3 stages of freezing, signature patterns, and the freezing technique. So if you want to see that PDF, go to my Substack. And there's an MP4 file. I'll try and put that video on the end of the podcast. Sometimes you just need to step back, take a breath, and get perspective. That's what Doc Malik offers. Of course, his extensive medical knowledge and personal experiences are worth the consult alone. But it truly is the safe, relaxed space he creates for open conversations that are the real gem here. And he's global. I'm in Australia, and he got up very early for our chats. Forever grateful. Thanks, Ahmed. Louise, 5 stars. Folks, 94 5-star reviews. I've helped people with a whole host of issues, from managing cancers to strokes to heart attacks to bowel surgery to mental illness, you name it. If you've got a health issue, if you're navigating the healthcare system, mainstream or alternative, let me help you navigate them both. Because trust me, both of them are full of pitfalls, and my aim is to empower you, to educate you, and to put you in the driving seat. Whether it's acute or chronic injury, a second opinion, please pick my brains. Visit my website, docmalik.com, or go directly to my booking page, which is docmalik.setmore, setmore.com. I look forward to helping you. Now, I'm just going to read out a few comments. This is Sarah. A great 5 hours and reminder of some of the greats. Happy podcast birthday, Doc. Here's to the next 500. Pete Brink. Sorry, Doc. I do not normally leave more than one comment on your podcast, but I feel strongly that I do on this occasion. Having now listened to the complete podcast, I feel this will historically become a vital resource for many of us. This will become almost like a Bible to me. Every time I doubt that we were wrong and all the sacrifices we made, often being ridiculed, humiliated, and losing friends and family, I will simply put this on and feel relief that we are totally vindicated. And that's regarding episode 500, folks. And I'm actually going to be doing another compilation episode because there's so many more guests and clips that could have been made. And I'm working on that already. Sign up. It's only £6 a month. More importantly, what you're really doing is supporting one of the very few, you could even argue handful, of truly independent alternative media out there. Mainstream media, as we all know, is captured. So is much of the alternative media space. I'm not sponsored by anyone. I'm supported by you, the listener. I am beholden to no one but you, the listener. I'm uncaptured, unfiltered, raw and honest, and fighting in your corner for your family and your freedom. Anyway, folks, before we get into the podcast, just a reminder, I also have a shop page on my website, docmalik.com. You'll see my affiliates there. It's just a handful of companies that my family and I use. Trusted, well aligned. They think the way we do. They're local. They're small businesses. Let's support them. You'll find a code and get a discount off as well. All right, folks, enjoy this show. It's good to be back.
You are listening to the Doc Malik podcast. This show is 100% independent and fully funded by listeners like yourself. So, if you wish to support Ahmed in all that he is doing, then please subscribe to his channel on Spotify or his Substack. Or simply buy him a coffee with a one-off donation, links to which can be found at docmalik.com. Now, let's get on with the show.
Veda Austin. One, I need to say, I love your name, Veda Austin. Veda is a Sanskrit name. And I don't know, is that where your name comes from? Because it's not a typical kind of Anglo-Saxon name. What's the origin of your name?
Oh, it's not. A lot of people don't know this story, so I'm so glad you asked me. But my mum, she was she was from England, but she was English, French, Romany, and Russian.
Oh, wow.
But she sounded like Wurzel Gummidge because she came from Devon and she had a very, very strong accent when she came to New Zealand. And she came to New Zealand on a Russian ship. And she made friends with a Russian woman. And I remember her saying that the ship was entirely run by women, except the captain was a man. And it was the cleanest ship she'd ever been on. And she said that the friend that she made, her name was Veda, and Veda, and apparently it was a Russian name. And so when she came to New Zealand and when she eventually she had me, she really liked that name. She called me Veda. And then as I grew up, more of the community that I had a lot to do with were like, oh, Veda, your name is Veda. And of course, I started to learn so much more about the Vedic scriptures and Ayurveda and all of these things. I've been to India 9 times. It's kind of like a second home to me. But the funny thing is, even my middle name is Indian. It's another Hindi name or Sanskrit name. And my mum was going to call me with my middle name was going to be Karen, but she spelt it Karan, Karan. Mum spelt things the way they sounded. So I actually have 2 Indian names.
I love it. I love names. I used to see a lot of patients over the years, 25 years. And I would love it when I came across a name I've never come across before. I think it's fascinating. And there's always a story behind a name, just like the way you've just described your story. It's lovely. Fascinating. I love it. Anyway, let's talk about some other names. Are you basically the equivalent of, that Japanese chappie? His name, Masa... I never pronounce it properly. I always get it wrong. I always mess it up. Do you know who I'm talking about? That's it. I always mess it up. He passed away, but he did a book on the water and the crystallography. And are you basically the modern version of that?
Uh, well, I would say we were all very different. Um, but you could say that in some sense. My work is quite different than Masaru Emoto's. He was looking through a microscope. I'm literally taking photos on my iPhone. He was flash freezing a cold lab, and I'm doing it in my kitchen. My work is very accessible. So anybody, and actually thousands of people now who I've taught are doing it around the world. Uh, and he had a slightly different approach, although he really opened the door for people to see themselves as bodies of water. So he was a pioneer in that way. As I think he became very famous off approximately 8 photos that were shown very much in contrast of love and hate and heavy metal and classical music and gratitude and something like "You Fool." So they that really shows that pictures speak 1,000 words. So in the same sense, I do use pictures and words and thoughts and things like that with water. So we are both working in crystallography, just slightly different ways. We are both showing that water stores information and shares it within a crystallographic medium.
Well, I think it's incredible. I mean, the funny thing is, if you asked me 3, 4 years ago, I would have said this all sounds like quackery. And the thing is, if you go on Wikipedia, unfortunately, it still describes Masaru Emoto as pseudoscientific hypothesis and, pseudoscientist. But, his book in 2004, that Hidden Messages in Water, I think it's quite groundbreaking. And even just talking about water in a structured way and memory, you know, after talking to our mutual friend Jared Pollock, I mean, this is not quackery. This is real. There is such a thing as structured water, and it contains memory. And he described it in a very scientific way about charges as well. It can be -2, -1, neutral, +1, +2. It was kind of insane. And then I asked him, this be the basis of homeopathy, that there's some memory in the water, or quantum physics? And he said, maybe, who knows? I mean, I just think there's so much we don't know. Um, with your experiments and your work, what do you think is going
The
on?
more we study water, the more we realize that we barely know anything. And it seems such a crazy thing to say, given that by molecular count we're 99% water, and that we literally see everything through the lens of water because our eye lens is 99% water. And yet we don't know hardly anything really about what flows through our body and what flows through the life force energy of all things.
Yeah. Now you've got a presentation up with some pictures, and I actually visit your Instagram account once a week and look at your pictures, and I find them fascinating. Can you talk me through your little presentation, please, and our listeners?
Yeah,
What are we looking at here?
yeah, absolutely. Well, this picture here, this is the very, very first photo that I ever took. I was very curious a decade ago now if water really could store information, or this term memory. Um, and I'd seen Emoto's work, but I'd also seen a man by the name of Laurent Costa's work. He's still alive. He is a French microscopic photographer of ice crystals. And he worked in a slightly different way to Emoto, because rather than experimenting, he considered water to be his spiritual teacher, and he didn't want to experiment on water. And I would suggest that I'm in a similar vein to that. I think that's one of the reasons we see such a breadth of different kinds of responses that are not only in geometries but in picture form. And there's quite a big difference between those two things. So he was seeing geometries in the ice, much like Emoto, but what he would do is sometimes, like, he would smile at the water before he flash froze it, for example, and he did the best he could to remain neutral, to invite water to share whatever it wanted rather than expecting it or asking it to share something about him. And so when he would smile at it, it was almost, a very natural, organic thing that he did. And so he was literally seeing smiley faces down the microscope in the crystallography. He was seeing things like hearts and fish that were relative to his thoughts of that day, or something that he'd seen that day that he wasn't even thinking about at the time. So he also, so he really was quite inspiring. And then there was another man called Thomas Hieronymus who observed that the freshly placed organs of an animal appeared to be affecting the way the frost froze on the glass behind it when he went into a Parisian meat market on a really cold day. So he was seeing like um, the shape of a liver organ appeared in the frost above a liver organ, and so on and so forth. And so his hypothesis was there seemed to be some kind of life force energy still emanating out of these organs, even though they weren't attached to an animal. And he put that down to there being
Wow.
water in the blood. And water likes to communicate with itself in all its forms. So in each, excuse me, in each organ, there is something called a sonic signature, which is like a cymatic imprint of form and function. And that was sharing information with the water in the air. And the water in the air was so cold that when it hit the glass, it took the form of the information it was shared with. And so I took that and I thought, well, this is great because he's seeing this phenomena with his naked eye. And 10 years ago, I didn't have a microscope. So in many ways, that's actually served me well because it's kind of organically led me to discover a specific freezing technique. But in this particular photo, what I had done was that I got a glass petri dish because I am a water researcher, but I worked professionally as an oil painter as well for many years. So we're all rather multifaceted. So I see the world through an artistic lens naturally. And so in the glass dish, I had some spring water. And I'd had a healing experience with some spring water. So I used that to start with, although I used many waters. There was a bit of fluff floating around in the dish because I was thinking I'd project a thought into it. I was sitting there looking at the water, thinking, what am I going to think about? What thought am I going to project? And I noticed this bit of fluff in the dish, so I took the fluff out with my hand, and I thought, oh, I wonder if my hand will impact the water's memory. And I thought, well, that thought will do. And I put it into my regular freezer, and I literally forgot about it. This was when I froze water solid because I didn't know any better. And I haven't done that in 9 years. So when I finally pulled the dish out and held it up to the light, this was the first photo that I ever took. And I was so taken aback that it is such a clear hand. And I was questioning myself, though. And I showed my son, I said, what does this look like to you? And he looked like it was crazy. He said, it's like a hand, Mum, like an x-ray of a hand. And it really looks like that. And now I have close to 50,000 photographs of water responding in an incredibly intelligent way. And that's been an obsession, really, for the last 10 years. So the very second photo that I took was from seawater because I thought if any water will be naturally informed, surely it would be seawater. And so I froze some seawater and I was tentatively sitting outside the freezer thinking, oh my God, like if I see something relative to the ocean here, then this maybe isn't random, because it's always possible that this hand could have been random. I mean, you don't know until you know.
Yeah, if you look at the clouds, you can see any shape you like, and it might just be, you know what, you just see what you want to see, kind of thing.
Yeah, there's this term pareidolia, which is where we make shapes up in our mind based off something we want to see. And I can address that in some ways because Jerry Pollack, who you've mentioned, actually gave me a good suggestion. And he said that, why don't you put a survey together of 25 of your photographs and just write, what does this look like to you? With no leading question. And so I circulated that around through other people. So people didn't know what they were looking at and they didn't know it was coming from me. And 280 people did the survey, and about approximately 85 people could recognize all of the images for what the influence was prior to freezing. And there were 3 images where 100% of people were able to recognize the image for the influence, and this hand picture was one of them. So when 100% of people agree that this picture looks like a hand, then it isn't pareidolia. So I wanted to address that, because some things can, some people say, well, it's very subjective. Some art can be very subjective, but there's very little to kind of go, I think it looks like a hand. It really does. So this picture was the fish picture from the seawater. So it's frozen solid, which is why it has a different texture. It's more feathery. And this is the way that when you actually go and collect water from the beach, that even that seawater can freeze slightly differently when it's over frozen. And for me, this is a solid block of ice is over frozen. So you can see the outline of the fish, the eye, the gill, and the fin. But this is the difference between my old technique and my new technique. So you can see there's a huge difference in light coming through and in clarity. So a year of photographing imagery just completely solid. I started to investigate more about the 4th phase of water. I was very interested in knowing more about, the stage of freezing. When did the pattern start to form? So I started to open my freezer earlier and earlier until eventually I opened the freezer and I saw that there was liquid on top and ice underneath. And I was curious about that. So I took the dish out, tipped the liquid away, and photographed the crystallography that was stuck to the dish. And that, in a nutshell, really is my technique. It takes about 5 minutes and 20 seconds in my freezer. It's different for everyone's freezers. And this photo you're seeing here, that photo was taken by my son. My son's name also has an Indian name. His name is Rama. He's actually part Indian, named after Lord Rama. And Lord Rama has a bow and arrow, right? And so my son Rama was trying to con me into buying him a bow and arrow. And he'd grown up with me doing this crystallography. And so he was thinking outside the box, which I always give him points for. And he said, Mum, if I can project the thought of an arrow into, in his own words, he said it like in a much more childlike way, but essentially he said, if I can get an arrow in the ice, do you reckon you can get me a bow and arrow? And I said, well, let's see what happens, and maybe. And so he took maybe as a yes. And so he literally I watched him do it. He held the dish of water. He really, really thought hard about an arrow. And he was like, he even got his little hands and he like held back his arm, like pinged an arrow into the water, like in a kind of imaginary way, I suppose. And then he froze the water. He did it using my technique, and he took this photograph. And I think when you see the clarity of that arrow, and you just look how metallic it looks, and like it's literally like stuck in the ice. There's something very, very special about that. And so he got a little toy bow and arrow, which he played with for many years until it died, really. So
I need to ask you a very important question. How did you manage to get him to play with a toy for many years? Because I got 3 kids, 5, 6, and 8. And they play with their toys for a day, and then they never want to play with them ever again, and they want something new. And we're very strict now. We go, no, play with your toys. How the heck did you get him to play with his toys?
he actually was always my son Rama, when he was young, he wanted to be an actor, and so he would dress up in character for like an entire year. For example, he was Indiana Jones, and that year kind of led over into the year he had to start school. So he was like 4, just turning 5. And he was grossly disappointed when he had to wear a school uniform. And he couldn't go dressed as Indiana Jones. But for an entire year, I could barely get him out of any Indiana Jones clothing. And so for him, for the stage he was at, which was pretty quite young, he was really, really obsessed with his bow and arrow. And so he was taking on the personality, I guess, of Rama. And so he looked after his bow and arrow, and he would have it a very special place by his bed. And we actually, it's still intact, which was like, we lost a lot of the arrows, but he still got the bow. So, it's somewhere in the garage now.
Wow. So listen, I'm quite comforted by the fact that you could actually get your son to do this, because I was thinking of subscribing to your technique, because I know on your website you talk about your techniques, but it's all kind of behind a paywall. And I wasn't really sure, like, can I actually, will this actually work at home? Do I have the right equipment? Can you just like basically break it down? Like, what do you need? You need a freezer? Do you need like some glass petri dishes? You need water? Is it distilled water, filtered water, tap water? I mean, can you just roughly describe how you do it?
Well, I would also suggest that if you went a little bit further, you might read that if for anyone that can't afford it, it's actually free. You can literally just and I call it CMP, which stands for collective molecular photography. That's what I call my technique. But when you're checking out, you just put in the word blessing, and it's free. I think I have about 20 people order it every day for free. And I'm thinking of having it for free permanently, because it's really important, I think, that people learn it. It's not, I think that's a really nice thing to be able to have for people. And that free blessing has been there for several years now. What you need is ideally a glass petri dish. But if you are desperate to try and you don't have a dish and you can't wait for it to arrive, or something happened and it broke in the mail, which it sadly does happen sometimes, you can, if you've got a glass Pyrex or a glass baking tray, even though it's a little big, you can still use that, as long as you have the correct amount of water in it. You can use a glass that has a flat glass bottom. And even though, again, that's not ideal, it still works. But it's just about getting the right amount of water correct and the timing right. So you just need a glass dish of some kind, ideally a glass petri dish. I use a 10 centimeter diameter dish. It will come with a lid. As you know, petri dishes come with a lid. And people always ask, do you cover your dishes when you put them in the freezer? And the answer is no, for 2 reasons. The first reason is super practical, is that when you're learning this technique, a frost will freeze over the top, which means you'll have to take the lid off. You're going to bump the sample. It can be problematic. So it's just a practical reason I don't do that. The second reason, I'm completely not practical. I am completely projecting. It is not scientific. And I tell people that openly and honestly. I get a little claustrophobic. I don't like the idea of being covered over, and occasionally I projected that into the water. That's my stuff. You do not have to do it in the same way that I do. But when you're beginning this work, it is very important that you see the stage of freezing to be able to understand when the water is freezing correctly. The issue can sometimes, there's that freezing frost issue is a problem. But once you've actually got your technique down, that can be fun. Actually, you can take the lid off and photograph the frost that's frozen on the lid, which forms kind of intelligent patterns as well relative to the water that's in it. There is a communication that happens, but it will melt so quickly you'll barely have time to actually take a photograph unless you take the photo of that in the freezer using the freezer light. But all the other dishes, you take them out. Once you see liquid on top and ice underneath, you literally drain the liquid away and you photograph the crystallography as fast as you can, and then you go through the photographs. Sometimes the imagery is so large and obvious, but somehow we miss that. And it's when you go looking for something and before you photographed it and you miss it, you'll miss ever seeing it because you would have not photographed it. So people can get very, very excited when they see the crystallography for the first time and literally just forget to take photos.
Wow, I can't wait to do this. I've got 3 young kids under 10. I think this is going to be amazing. It's going to be so much fun. Can I ask, you talk about water as if it's living, as if it's, what do you think of water? What is water? Is it an organism, a being, alive? What is it to you?
I mean, I can tell you what it is to me because that's what you've asked, and then we can get into some other ideas around it. But for me, water is also a reflection of the divinity in me. I don't see water so much as something that is separate from me. When I teach in schools, and I go into schools and teach a mix of science and art projects as a special kind of speaker, I always say to the children, if your skin was invisible and your organs were see-through, what would you look like? And they always come back with rivers and waterfalls and tributaries. One boy said he'd looked like a brain-shaped cloud with electrical rain shining down in the shape of a person. Children get that. They can just immediately get it. And when we cut ourselves, we leak. When we're emotional, we leak. When we go to the bathroom, we leak. And so we're only a cut away from liquid, but we see ourselves as so solid. And the water in our glass, when we're drinking water, has literally been through the trees, it's been through the animals, it's been through the earth, it's been through our ancestors. It's managed to find its way into a glass to become us. And so by molecular count, like I said, not by volume, we're 99% water. That means there's more water molecules in our bodies than stars in the Milky Way. And from my understanding of observation of all these years of looking at water in this specific way, I think that water actually holds a divine principle, a living divine principle. Where there is life, there is water. All living things have water and salts within them. And so there is talk about, is water conscious, or maybe is our consciousness affecting water? On this long journey I've been on, and it being as prolific as I am, which you have to be to have that many photographs that I do, in the early stages I might have thought that water was responding to consciousness rather than reacting. I thought that, or maybe it's a little bit different than that. Maybe I thought water was reacting to consciousness in the beginning. But as I started to become more investigative and ask questions which I didn't know what the answers might be, like I don't have anything limiting me to what I can do. So I can literally ask questions outright. I can ask them with my mind. I can use images and put my petri dish of water on top of pictures. I can put petri dishes of water on top of books. I can, like, all kinds. I mean, you name it. I've done so many different things to see how water might react or respond. But when I started writing words, for example, that we don't have a visual for, like the word ego, it's a concept. It's a concept we understand, but we need a lot of words to explain it because there's not one physical ego that we can go to the shop and buy. So when we think about the word ego, a thing doesn't kind of come up, a picture doesn't necessarily come up for us. Not like a book, for example, or glasses or something that we actually is very tangible. It's a concept. So when I wrote the word ego and put my dish of water on top of it for 30 seconds and removed, the image that came out was so incredible because it was a picture that literally spoke 1,000 words. It was these big shoulders, this long neck, a little face, and a giant balloon head. It was like this kind of personification of an ego that's like a big, huge like a big outer body with a great big inflated head, but a small face. And that was remarkable to me. And I've done that with the word grief. So with grief, you might be able to project the thought of tears or maybe a broken heart, but that's not what water designed. Water designed the outline of the body with holes inside. And so there is this intelligence where even the words IVF, now granted, that's I guess that's different because I know what that means, but there's a lot of steps to IVF, so it could mean something different at each stage. But these letters, IVF, don't actually spell a word. And I don't just use English words. I've used all kinds of different words, and we've discovered a lot of interesting things. But water designed a needle going into what looked like an egg. And so there's this sophistication, a real sophistication in the imagery. But I want to say, for people that are beginning and for children and for anyone, there are three things that you might see when you begin this work and as you continue on. I would say that water, if you will, communicates in three ways. There is a signature pattern. So a signature pattern is a pattern that essentially allows you to identify the type of water it is. So tap water has a certain pattern, rainwater does, spring water does, seawater does, filtered water does. So you get to recognize the pattern. So you might see that water is sharing something about itself through a signature pattern. You might see art. See, I see the world through the an artistic lens because I was an oil painter. Then you might see hydroglyphs, and hydroglyphs are where I'm getting more scientific attention for because of the amount of repeatability with them that I have. And I use words for a hydroglyph. So essentially a hydroglyph is a symbol in ice where I have used a word as the influence prior to freezing, and I need to have seen the same symbol appear at least 50 times using the same word influence to say that I have one hydroglyph, because I always thought that 50 is random. And over the last 5.5, nearly 6 years of working with hydroglyphs, separate to all my other crystallographic work, I have about 40 hydroglyphs. And so we're understanding this sort of language of water, and I have a team of people that speak different languages, writing the same word in their language. And what's interesting is that in English, for example, the word water has a symbol, and that symbol looks like wavy patterns that look a little bit like fire. It's very similar to the fire hydroglyph, which has the meaning also of creation. There are two. We've discovered there are multiple words associated with each symbol. But so for a water, in English, water is a very basic word. We understand water means water. But in a more complex language like Hebrew, there's a very, very deep meanings. And so what we found is that when someone writes the word water in Hebrew, they've shown that it shows the same hydroglyph, but it has other hydroglyphs within the dish. So they're saying that there is more that needs to be explained. It's a bigger meaning. And so water is not just reading words, and it's not reading words. It absorbs the energy that comes from these written words, which are the written word is kind of like the most sort of static place we've got things. So it's like, imagine what it took to become a word. So you had to have seen something, you had to have thought about it, you had to have wanted to name it something, you had to have spoken a word, and then you finally have to get a language to write the word. So water seems to reverse engineer all of that back to a symbol that has a living principle. So hydroglyphs are not just something that I can give 64 examples for each one, for example, which is what I do when I'm presenting hydroglyphs. But you can see them with your naked eye. You can photograph them, but you can also eat them. So the stage of freezing of my crystallography is this fourth phase stage. So as it's big, and I think of the three stages of freezing. There is like the first stage is where there's liquid on top and ice underneath. The second stage is where there are two layers of ice with liquid in between, and then there is a solid. I think of it as spirit, blood, and body. And the stage of freezing, which I take the first stage, it actually is in its fourth phase stage. I call it the stage of creation. It's pushing out all the solates. So when you're tipping the liquid water away, that's that liquid which holds all the salts, minerals, and anything else. And those are what actually cloud that make the ice cloudy. So the first stage shows a clarity in the ice. There's so much light coming through. If you think about the difference between the hand and the arrow, there's so much light coming through. And that's also because it's not clouded with solates. So it's a very healthy stage also to eat the ice. And the children taught me that. My daughter was, I was holding a dish up, and my daughter Shanti, another Indian name, she said, oh, Mummy, can I have it? And I gave it to her. She started eating the ice. And I said, what are you doing? And she said, it's good for me. Really? And then her brother, Ramos, started doing it. And then I started teaching people. And because the amount of people that learnt my technique, a lot of them are parents, and they say that their children eat the ice. And so now we've started getting people to write words that come out of the well of knowledge within them. And for healing. Like, for example, someone who can't sleep might write the word rest and eat the crystallography. And it seems to take about a week to really implement. But people are starting to have positive impacts. And what's interesting is that water is informed because it's informed. And so how does it work? And so, I mean, you mentioned homeopathy. I have a new book coming out which has a whole little chapter on homeopathy, using homeopathic drops and seeing that into the water, and using my crystallographic method and seeing the imagery of the plant or the whatever it was seem to show up in the ice. And we're starting to also see repeatability. And I think of things perhaps from a bit of an Indigenous perspective. My father is native New Zealand Maori, and there is a word for spirit in this language, which is wairua, which means spirit, like I mentioned. And so wairua, wai is water and rua is two. It's the two waters, the physical and spiritual waters. And so there is this concept in this culture that water has a living principle, that it is also the house of our ancestors, and there is a responsibility to care for it, and an understanding that it is a body, and it has a head and it has a mouth. So we have headwaters, we have the mouth of a river, we have a body of water. So there are these words we use, even in the English language, and water never used to be called water. It used to be called the waters in Old English, and translated into other languages. And the waters was because it was considered a holy body of water. And when Romans created plumbing and we started to see waste getting taken away by water, it got reduced to water. And now we try to reduce it to H2O, but where waters is still used in the English language, outside of biblically, is where we say her waters broke. We don't say her water broke. We say her waters broke. So there is this inkling, this little trickling down of our actual original understanding and recognition of water as being something living and having living principles. And the word living water is right throughout a lot of different, through the Bible and various other language languages translated into different philosophies and various other things, this idea of living water. And I actually think we have living water within us, but I don't think that water is ever dead. People say dead water, oh, that tap water is dead, that polluted water is dead. But in actual fact, I have a hydroglyph for the word living. But interestingly, I had identified that, and then a man reached out to me and he said that he was only given a few months to live. Could I please ask what death looked like to water? So I used the word death in the same way. And I kept seeing the living glyph. I kept seeing this beautiful, what I call a star fern hexagon. And I was like, God, but this means living. And this is why we're seeing this, until eventually, of course, I realized, because I did it more than 50 times to make sure, that water doesn't die. Water only transitions from one stage to another. And so from the perspective of water, death is just another word for life, a transition of life, because there is no death in that respect. I mean, it's so interesting when you watch water boil, right? And just before it starts boiling, and you look in a pan, and it's fun to do this with the children, you'll see all these squiggly, swirly patterns at the
Yes.
bottom of the pan,
Yeah.
right? And those are
Little
actually
worms.
little tubes. They're like little worms. They're tubes made of water that water has created, like little tiny tunnels for it to become, the vapor comes out of the tubes. It's literally like, you know how when we talk to people who have a past, like a near-death experience, for example, and they say they see this tunnel they go through. Well, it's literally what water's creating in that boiling stage, is these tubes to become out like a vapor.
Oh,
So
wow.
very, very
Yeah.
interesting.
It is interesting. Can you close your share for a second? And I'm going to share something from your website, if that's all right. Oh, wow. You blew my mind there. I thought, I've just learned that, we're beings of magnetism, electric fields, water. I mean, just so much. And I thought maybe it's our electrical field or our magnetism that we can project into the water, which is changing the structure of it or giving it, imparting memory on it. But then I really didn't. I mean, what you say is so much more than that. Like, you put a flower in the petri dish, and then you take the flower away, and then you get a clear image of a flower with every petal on it. And I was like, how the hell did this happen? It's kind of, honestly, what you're telling me is like so amazing, but so my brain is hurting just trying to understand it. And I think I have to just accept I don't fully get it. I don't fully get it. But it's definitely real, and it's not just real, it's very beautiful. I mean, I'm just going to share this image. Can you see this image? Like, written number 4. That's incredible. I mean, that is a number 4. And I mean, look at this. That's a person's face there. That's insane.
Yeah, that's my friend Cindy. We call her the face of water now. I actually, in my presentation, I showed water the ice face, and it designed the negative of her face.
Wow. I mean, some of this is a photo influence. So you're getting a petri dish and you're putting the water on top of this picture. So there's no magnetism there. See, unless it's you. I mean, have you ever done it where you've put a picture blind, no one has seen the picture, and so they're not able to project the image. And then whether it still comes, I mean, look at that. I mean, that's a ladder there. There's a person going up there. It's insane. I mean, that flower here, and then the next one. I mean, that's obviously, see, 2 flowers. What I'm trying to say is, have you tried seeing whether it really is the picture that's giving that image to the water? The water is reading the picture, as in like the person putting the book down and the picture in the petri dish is blind to it. They haven't seen it. Have you tried that?
I've done what we would term as like a long distance projections, where I don't know what people are projecting. So, for example, this one guy. Well, there's 2 examples, and I think that these are as very blind, so they've been really fun to work with. But consciousness isn't still involved. And I'll give you a little example of someone that did something in a very, very clinical way as well. So just to give two different examples that are quite, yeah, very, very extremely different. So I have two friends, one friend in the States, and she'd recently got married. I hadn't met her husband yet. You know how you have friends all over the world. Sometimes you hardly see them very often. And so I had asked her to project a thought into my petri dish of water in New Zealand, but not tell me what it was. And so she's like, yep, sure, no problem. And then her husband kind of came into the FaceTime and was like waving and like, hi. And I'm like, oh, hi, so nice to meet you. I said, I know this is going to sound crazy, but just to make it even more random, how about you, who I don't know and I've never met before, send like a project a thought into my awaiting petri dish? And I'm sure he thought I was nuts, but that's okay. I mean, he was a good sport. I appreciate that. And so I've been vegetarian since I was 8. Just so this thing that he thought is something that I would never think. And so he was just on his way. He was going out pheasant hunting. And so he projected the thought of catching a pheasant and carrying it and holding it and taking it back home, which would never be something that I would personally think about, right? And so yeah. And so I'm talking to my friend and he says, oh, thanks. And he goes off to do his stuff, getting ready to go out. And so I freeze it and then I take a photo and then I ring her right back and I send the photo to her. And before he leaves, she shows him the photograph. And it's a very clear image to me. And he looks at this photo and he didn't really know what to do with it because he couldn't make sense of how this is even possible. But there was literally this hand holding a bird that looks like a pheasant in the ice. And I said, so what was he thinking? And she said he was thinking about going catching a pheasant. And both of them, nobody really knew much what to say because this is the first time I'd done it. And it was just quite, I mean, I shouldn't be surprised anymore, but I always am surprised. And then I have another lady, and she was a good sport as well. And I said, look, can you just, send a thought to the water, and I'll hold space for it. And I've known her a while, and she's always had a very big fear of water, which is one of the reasons I also wanted to do it with her to see what might show up. And so she's had a big fear of drowning, very, very, her whole life. So she'd been just going to therapy, and the therapist had said, let's begin with you imagining that you're standing in water in the safest way you feel most comfortable. Let's start with imagining. So she'd been practicing just imagining standing in water. So she had expanded on that because she's Hindu, and so she says that she was standing in the river Ganges. So if she died in the imagining, she would at least die in a holy river. And she said that she was standing on a rock with her head above water. She didn't tell me all of this. She told me this later, right? So that's what she projected, that thought of standing in the river with her head above water, standing on a rock. So I did the whole, and I didn't even know that she had been going to therapy. We hadn't spoken in quite some time. And so anyway, yeah, that was what we saw in the ice. And, it was really the way water designs, it's remarkable. You can see what the imagery is. Water doesn't behave like a photocopier. It is like an artistic expression, which makes it, to me, even more sophisticated, because to me that suggests that there is an intelligence. Art is very, very, yeah, a very human thing. People in caves were like drawing art to express their world. Um, water is well aware of our world because it's in every life form there is. So the opposite to what I just sort of told you about was when I was working for some people a while ago, and they really wanted to see if it could be scientifically proven what my technique, using my technique, that if water would in fact design without any human interaction or as little as possible. And they had a scientist from Canada coming over. They had multiple companies, and he was working for them on a project. So they got him to work with me for 10 days. And so I taught him my freezing method, and I told him consciousness is a really important piece to this work, like this conscious connection, because I think this is working through light, which I'll share with you in a second. Anyway, so this guy said, right, well, we'll take consciousness completely out of it because we don't, like, scientifically, he wanted to see if water was doing this on its own or whether it needed conscious communication. And so he said he didn't have a lot of time to prepare. He wanted to use like a robot, but there was no time to get that whole automated thing going. So he did what he could. So he used a lab, and he got someone to program a computer so that multiple photos like would just slide through and then freeze on one. And then there was a petri dish of water that he'd leave in front of it. He had the laptop to the back of the entrance of the lab. So when he came in, he wasn't looking at a picture. He'd shut the laptop, get the dish, and freeze it, right? So he did it the best he could given the short period of time he was asked to do it. And each day he would get back to me and he said, right, well, there's nothing there. It's very, 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 very brief conversations. Nothing there, nothing of interest, da da da. And all the while I'm thinking, that poor water, this must be what it feels like to be a lab rat. I was feeling worse and worse for it. Eventually, on the second to last day, he rings me and he says, well, there's something very clear. My colleagues and I, we can all recognize it in the ice. But it doesn't look like what's on the pitcher influence. It's like, oh, okay. Well, what was the pitcher influence? And he said it was a stainless steel medical tray with a heart inside of it. And I was like, oh God, really? Okay. Well, what was it? The image in the ice? And he shared it with me, and it was this round circle with two eyes, a nose, and a sad face. It was like a sad emoji. And I said, so you think that has nothing to do with the image? What water is doing here is where is your heart? And so he said he agreed, and he admitted that it was really interesting, but it never got taken any further. And it was in that moment also that I decided that the way in which I interact with water going forward to learn more is not about removing my consciousness, but becoming in right relationship with water more and more and more, so that water feels safe enough to share everything it's with me that I need to know. So rather than take it away and isolate it, I want to include it. And if it is intelligent, if there is an intelligence here that we're seeing, which I am certainly seeing, then why not engage that like a teacher? And so that's, I think, why I got so far with the work. So this Indigenous woman, she said to me that she could speak to bees. And I know that this sounds very unscientific, but actually it does lend itself to scientific knowledge. And I think that true science and Indigenous wisdom, they often overlay. So she said she could speak to bees.
Honestly, I'm open to everything. Go for it.
So she said that she would watch the beehives for really long periods of time. And she said that one day a bee communicated to her in whatever way it did and said, we don't mind you looking at our hives, but please don't look at them for so long because your conscious expression is putting too much light in the hive and we like it to be darker.
Oh, wow.
So where we're conscious expression is where we put our light. So water is a container of photonic light. And this is a really important piece because there have been times where I've opened the freezer, just as water's beginning to freeze, it sends out these little shoots. And at the end of those shoots, you can literally see light coming out of the tip of the ice. And I've photographed it, I've videoed it, and I've seen it. I actually think because water is a container of light, and we emit light, not just through conscious expression, but in certain dark spaces using a certain camera, you can see that we have a type of bioluminescence, right? So water is absorbing light because that's what it does, and light holds information, right? So I actually think, given that I see light coming out of the ice, I think it is light that paves the way for the design of the ice, and that there's intelligence formations are coming from a communication from light to this container that to hold light. And when given the right environment, it literally is able to share that information. There was a man by the name of Gennady Krokalev. He was Russian. He was a scientist and psychiatrist, and he worked with psychiatric patients for 20 years. And he discovered, after reading something, that the retina of the eye, which is mostly water, can actually share project a picture out of the eyes that can be photographed by a certain type of camera. So he wanted to investigate that further. And so he worked with his patients, and as he got this camera called a Zenith camera. It's a black and white old-fashioned camera with a long lens thing. And so he put these goggles on the more like a scuba diving mask over the patient's eyes and took the lens out, and he attached the camera lens to the goggles. I do share a lot of these photos, so I can share them with you, and you can share it later or something like that if you like, or there's other ways people can see them. Anyway, so these patients were having hallucinations and visions. And that was one of the reasons they were in hospitals. So they were having very clear hallucinations. So he did this in a very calm way. Sorry, my accent can sometimes be hard to understand. And he had someone working with him. So he gently asked them, "What are you seeing?" And when they told him, then they would take the photos of the retina of their eyes. So they're literally just photographing the eyes. And he was getting black and white photographs of images. And of the 200 patients he worked with, 117 of them were able to confirm that the images from the photos he took were in fact what they were seeing. And they're not like perfect, clear photographs like we take now, but they are clearly identifiable. And so he was really amazing. And like I said, he did that for 20 years. And then in the more recent years, within the last, 15 years or so, 20 years, more Russian scientists repeated this, except they used someone who could remote view. And rather than using psychiatric patients. And so they did the same setup with the same Zenith camera and all the rest, and the goggles. And the scientist stood behind a wall and held up numbers and shapes. And as the remote viewer tuned in her mind's eye to what they were holding, she would say, "Okay, I'm ready." They would take the photo of her eyes. And they were able to prove that this actually works. And all the scientists did it. And they filmed it, and they did a documentary, and it's something like Thought is Material, It's Proven. I think that's what it's called. It's subtitled in very with English subtitles. And there were two hypotheses about it. One is that there is a secondary layer of consciousness that maybe we just can't see, where there are actually things we can't see, and that some people in some situations are seeing things. Or, which the second one is more popular, the brain sends information to the retina of the eye, which again is mostly water, fourth phase structured water, and that takes that information and just in a similar way to way water is taking information from the projection of thought in my work and given the right environment translates it into imagery, well, they're saying that the brain sends information to the eye, the retina of the eye, which is translated into a picture imagery, which is projected out like a hologram. And that is very interesting because they also suggest that certain animals can see these, like dogs and cats. They're very sensitive. You often see them looking at things we can't see. So this is like, and perhaps one of the ways in which dogs who can sense when someone is about to have an episode, like an epileptic episode, they can smell it, but we don't know. Perhaps it is that they can even see these projections of what's coming. So there's a great deal there. But what's super interesting is that that was the requirement for that to work was there had to be a mental visual picture in the mind's eye. My work, it's based off feeling, it's based off of so many different things. In fact, the less I think with my brain and the more I feel with my heart, the better the imagery. Water seems to respond far, far more to my feelings than my thoughts and will override something that I'm asking it to do if I'm sad. If I'm sad, I'll see sad faces all day in the ice. It won't show me the picture image.
I don't believe you get sad.
I am.
No, what have you
Oh,
got
I
to be
do.
sad
I mean,
about? What have you got to be sad about? I don't believe that for a second.
a good question to ask yourself actually when you are feeling sad, like what do I actually have to be sad about? But we're human and we have emotions. I think the less emotion that I get is really angry. I don't tend to get really angry and frustrated too much, although I do get all of the emotions. I am human, especially when you're stuck in traffic for hours. So what's interesting is that water won't design complex imagery whatsoever if I'm angry or frustrated. It won't work. It doesn't. It's not judging me, but it doesn't resonate at that frequency.
Do you know, it's funny. I was speaking to Mike Eden. Do you know who Mike Eden is? Have you heard of Mike
No.
Eden? So Mike Eden is a former Pfizer executive, and he's amazing. He's been calling out the BS from day one. And I was talking to him about energies and darkness and light, and this is off piste a bit, but I think we're in a spiritual battle between dark and light. And it's very important we stay happy. Because actually, if you think about it, being fearful and angry and worried and resentful and helpless and hopeless, these are all dark energies, dark feelings. And actually, if you think what positive and light is, it's happy, it's optimistic, it's hopeful. And like you, I'm human. I've felt all of those dark emotions quite recently, actually, when I got suspended and my career came to an end. But to be in the light, we need to be happy. We need to be happy. And it's funny, like we've been talking about light and happy and energy and positive, and it's kind of funny. It makes sense that the water doesn't respond to those dark things, anger and stuff. I think it makes sense.
I it doesn't. And what I think is interesting to know also is that the compassion. It's like when someone passes away, it's natural for us to grieve, for example. That there's a way in which we allow ourselves to let things out of ourselves. And so, I was told this particular thing, which I've always loved, because, if eyes are the windows to the soul, then I always say that tears are an expression of spirit in some way. It also reminds us just how fluid we are. And our face is designed in such a way that tears, especially in our deepest grief, especially when someone's passed that we love, like I really know that feeling. My mum died in 1999 and I still miss her. And so these tears, they come out of our eyes, they roll around our cheeks, but they come back towards our mouth because they've been reordered and restructured to be a medicine for our hearts. And I think that Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, he was saying it's far more important to search for your meaning, your purpose, because that's going to get you out of bed when you are not really feeling like it. When you are feeling sad, you can push that and actually have a purpose that's even greater for the world. And in that respect, water has been so much for me. In the times when I felt like it's been difficult, and whatever that is, acknowledging our humanness is also very good, but not to know that we can move on. When you have purpose, you naturally do that.
100%. 100%. You need purpose. You need love. You need to be happy. I've got a few more questions if you don't mind me asking. I always got told never put glass in the freezer, but I guess that's because water expands and it can cause it to shatter. If you've got an open petri dish, I guess it's quite safe, isn't it? And it's only going in for 5 minutes. There's no risk of it shattering or anything like that, is there?
I've never, in all the 10 years, I've never had a petri dish shatter. Yeah, it's not a concern. I mean, it's more concerning if you then take it out and pour some boiling water on it. You're going to shatter it then. But no, I've never had that problem.
All right, next. What you're doing, I find kind of mind blowing. It's just so interesting. Apart from people like Jerry Pollock, with his 4 phase of water in his lab, is there any other laboratory or scientific organization, institution researching water like this? Or, apart from that guy that contacted you, anyone else interested in this work and, seeing how they can apply it? Or is it just you out there doing this on your own?
I think because I'm using this very specific technique, but because I share it so widely, there's probably lots of people out there beginning the work. I encourage people to do it. I mean, I'm just talking about the way specifically I'm doing it. I am sure that there must be other people out there doing work with water and consciousness. I know there are certain scientists that work with the consciousness that are doing cymatics, for example, using frequencies. There's a lot of people in the water science field, which in all our work supports this idea, I think, that water is very sensitive to frequencies, to thoughts, to environment. That I think is becoming more and more established. One of the reasons that the mainstream scientists say that water can't have memory is because water is updating its information every trillionth of a second. Hydrogen bonds are breaking and forming, like rebonding. It's this constant kind of what they would term as molecular chaos. But if you spoke to someone in physics, they would suggest that there is a difference between molecular chaos and molecular excitement. So water can get excited, and when you're excited, there's usually something you're excited about. So there is actually multiple theories around it being around hydrogen, and hydrogen being the spirit of water, plasma being the mind of water, and water actually being the body, the house for the spirit of water. And that, for example, the sun is a great big ball of hydrogen, and hydrogen, or Genesis, and hydro is like the creator of water. So everything that's being evaporated is being taken back to the creator. So, water in these terms is mentioned like 722 times in the Bible, more than love and faith and worship. In the Islam, it says that all things are made of water. In the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about all things, all deities, all things made of water. If you talk about any creation stories, there is always water there. So you go further and further into these things, and then you start thinking, well, what do I really even know? And then you start thinking about salt. We'd need another hour to talk about salt, because that's another one of my fascinations. But I just what water I use. I don't tend to use distilled water because it lacks the salts and minerals, and I think it's salts and minerals that help water to store information for longer. It's one of the reasons I use a glass dish. Glass is made of silica. Silica is a type of crystal. It stores information. It helps water store information for longer. It's also hydrophilic as opposed to hydrophobic. So it actually is water loving. It helps the water. It doesn't bead off. So we have problems with plastic dishes where the water kind of opens up in the center. and we don't want that. So there's a great deal more, and I delve very much into areas I think that are really important, like water and spirit. What is the connection? Why is dew considered to be something like the Holy Spirit? Why it gets the first water that gets light? It's a very, very special fluid. And then you kind of get into, well, if water has memory, what's the point? Why do we have memory as people? And one of the reasons we have memory is so we can learn. And I think that in studies I've done around EMF, I've seen water literally talking to itself and teaching itself how to overcome these frequencies and improving from that. So the first study I ever did, where I went and put spring water, which I'd done a control for, so I knew its patterns, and I let that water melt. I put it by a 5G tower. I refroze it, and it froze. It looked like it had a shock, like a shock wave went through it, and it was very disordered. And then I let that melt and refroze it, and the shock wave lasted for quite some time. Well, you can only melt and freeze using my technique about 7 times if you put enough water in it, just the right amount. So a couple of years ago, I did the exact same thing. I actually used the same water source. I did the controls, and what I saw was that water gets a shock. There's a shock wave, and then the very next time I let that water melt and freeze. So I let that melt and then I refroze. I'm using the same water the whole time. Refroze it. There was disorder, but there were 2 hydroglyphs in the ice. And there was a message glyph and an information glyph. So water was sending itself a message of information, because this is in its infancy, hydroglyphs, right? We're still learning so much. The very next melt and freeze, water had designed itself so beautifully, I would have sworn it was perfect spring water. The crystallography was even better than it was originally. So it had informed itself. This other guy I didn't, who wrote something for the new book that's coming out soon, and he was working with water in a stage of a type of fire plasma. So people don't think that water can be fire, but actually water can look like fire in certain vapor stages and burn, but it won't burn. It won't like burn us, but it can like literally, it doesn't burn hot is what I'm trying to say, but it can cut like steel. It's really incredible. So he's working with plasma stage. Sometimes it's called Veda, and it's like a laser flame, right? And so what they discovered is that with that water needed half an hour at least to rest to work efficiently. If it kept going and they kept putting this frequency into the water to keep it at this level of this Veda thing, it wouldn't work efficiently. It needed to have this rest. But if they kept doing it and kept doing it for 24 hours or 48 hours, rather than just stop, water actually gave such a big electrical charge out that it nearly blew up their machinery. And what was so interesting about that is that, again, this isn't something water's supposed to be able to do, but yet it is. And so the more scientists, the more curious people, the more people become, investigative and observers of water, trying new things, we start to discover that the power within us, given that we are bodies of water, salts, and consciousness. If you pardon the pun and you just boil it down, we're water, salts, minerals, and consciousness. And salt, you put salt into water, it dissolves, but if the water evaporates, the salt is there. Water doesn't die. It's always only in one of its stages. And there are probably more stages than we know so far. And the secrets are always in the subtleties. Then, we are made of water that doesn't die, salt that doesn't die, and consciousness that science is still trying to wrap their heads around. This is very, very important. The water in the air is attracted to electrical charge. This essentially is giving us an extra web of information all around us because we give off electrical charge as electrical water beings. And that's how we can sense energetically how a room feels or a person feels, because the information exchange is coming through this liquid web and within this vapory type of stage. It's like I think it's just another stage of this evaporated water in the air. The fact that we breathe out means there's water in the air.
I can smell a thunderstorm. I know. I can be in the house. I'm not even looking at the clouds, and I'm like, oh my God, it feels like it's going to be lightning soon. And then, you go out and you're like, oh, look, dark clouds. And then 10 minutes later, boom.
I think that we understand weather very well because water understands itself very well. But no, we can smell all the microorganisms and stuff when rain is coming. Just that what smells like rain's coming. We are very, very sensory, and we are affected by the weather. We are affected by the outside world. But there's two worlds, the one we live on and the one we live in. The one we live on is all of the things we see. The one we live in is the one we experience the world through. Everything we see is coming in through the eyes. Everything we hear is coming in through our ears. Everything we taste is coming in through the body, through the tongue. Everything we touch, we're touching with our fingers. So all of the things we experience are actually within this body of water. And then I often will say, well, when are we not having that experience of only feeling things inside? But we can observe ourselves. And I think one of the spiritual aspects of water is the observer. So when you have someone and you interview them who have had a near-death experience, often they'll have a sense of rising, which is what a gas does. And then they will observe their body being resuscitated. And when they come back, so how can they come back? So that's a whole another story of which I'll be doing a whole webinar on in July. But I think when you start studying water, answers start coming. You're onto something that's true when the more you study it, the more things start to make sense rather than get more confusing. And I think it's also very simple. Water is the thing we've been looking for our whole lives, but we haven't even taken hardly any notice of it. That one thing that's been so wonderful doing this work is that water is not in resistance to where it goes. It is spiritual by nature, and that means non-judgmental, right? True spiritual nature is not in judgment. So water goes where water goes. And if water is going flushed in and down the toilet, eventually it was going to get eventually to the ocean sooner or later. All things are going back to source one way or another. It will evaporate, in our minds.
Yeah, when you drink water, like just talking to you, when I go back into the house and I get a glass of water, I feel like I'm almost going to say thank you, water. I'm going to be grateful to the water as I look into the cup and I then drink it. I mean, is that weird? That's the effect you've had on me now. I feel like thanking the water. Thank you for being part of me, becoming me.
I think that you're the welcoming committee. People
Yeah.
always ask me what's the best water to drink, and I would say something that a friend of mine always used to say, and that is, drink the water in your glass. Of all of the drinking water we have, no, I'm not talking about primary water, which is the water inside the Earth's mantle, but on all the surface water, there's like 1 or 2% that's drinkable. If it's such a first world problem, what water should I drink? We're so fortunate. You could be drinking the best, most pristine, amazing spring water, but if you don't welcome it into your body, because people always think, oh, what can this water do for me? Because they don't think of it of having its own life force energy at all. It could be life force energy that we are actually looking at. It could be emotions that are running past us in the streams that we look at, but we don't think about that. It could be many, many things that we don't realize is what it is. So, I would suggest that someone that all the best they've got, and this is a lot of the world, is just a filtered tap water. But if you are welcoming it into your body, water is going to heal you in the way that you receive it. your saliva is a huge percentage of, I think it's 98% water. And it has its ability to read information. And so when, for example, I spit into petri dishes, I've done a study on various different bodily fluids. And with saliva, we see imagery even in the saliva. That's the last word or something that you spoke. So the saliva is the first fluid that anything you eat or drink comes in contact with. So that is water being received by a fourth phase water, which is going to tell it about you. If you have, say, a simple thank you, or say what you're grateful for before you eat or drink, for example. You don't even have to say it out loud, if you don't want people to think whatever they might think. You can just say a quiet, simple thank you, and that be the last conscious words you spoke. There will literally just be a relationship. It's like a welcoming. You are the welcoming committee. It's like an ancestor coming to you and saying, I want to give you all my wisdom. And it's like, wow, that's amazing. That experience by drinking you and taking you in. There is a very, very significant difference in the way water will heal you or respond to you based on how you welcome it into your environment.
Have you watched the recent movie June, the latest one, the up-to-date one?
Yeah, I watched it when I was in the States, but I can't remember it all that well because it was like...
There's a scene where the guy comes and spits on the floor and he goes out, my gift of water. And it's all about water. And it's kind of amazing, actually. Like you said,
rewatch it.
you need to. The second part's coming out in March. I can't wait. I love June. I think I've watched it about 5 times now. My wife thinks I'm obsessed. I just love it. The sound effects, the visual, everything.
I know my husband was really wanting to rewatch it, so we'll put it on our list of movies to watch. Yeah, I actually recently was reading about this guy who used saliva, different people's saliva, their own personal saliva, and would rub it. I don't know what he did with it exactly, but he would rub it on their body, and it would work as an anesthetic. He was a doctor. He could do minor operations and use saliva as a numbing, like something that would numb, and they couldn't feel anything. So for thousands and thousands of people, so there's something very special about saliva.
Wow. Wow. Oof. Well, I've been very quiet in this podcast because you kind of been blowing my mind. I'm absolutely bamboozled by the whole thing. I think it's fascinating. I can't wait to do these little experiments with my kids. I've just got one last question, lovely Veda. It's a question I ask everybody. You're on your deathbed, you've hit your mid-hundreds, your family's all around you. Before you meet your maker, what advice, health or otherwise, would you give them before you pass on?
I have death days about twice a week where I imagine that this was my last day. How would I be living my life? It helps me be much more grateful for the moment that I'm in, when the times when the children are driving you crazy or this is happening and this is happening. It's like, well, if this is my last day, and really feel into it, what would I feel like? What's important? Our entire life, that when no one that's alive listening to this will say that they haven't had a life. We all have a life. But that life that we are so attached to, that means so much to us, is based entirely off memories. When we think about our life, we have to think about it because it is a memory. I always think as long as I am a beautiful memory in the hearts of the people that I've touched in my life, then I don't die either. Because if all we have is memories of our lives, and our lives are that important to us and that real to us, and I'm a memory in the hearts of my children and in the hearts of my loved ones, and I bring them a smile when they think of me, then I feel that there is this part of me that lives on within them as this memory. And I think it's simple. Life is like a balance, finding a balance of things. Judging yourself and others less is a really important piece of advice. I never wanted to live my life in the, oh, what would have happened if? I'd rather have stuffed something up royally and go, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that, but at least I know, rather than wishing I'd tried something my whole life. Worst thing that can happen is that it doesn't work out. I think that finding a purpose is what makes life really purposeful, and learning to look at yourself in the mirror and like what you see, not just on a physical level, but on all levels. Surprisingly, one of the hardest things, especially as a woman, is to look in the mirror and say, gosh, and see the beauty in the reflection. But that's what water shows me all the time. This beautiful expression of something divine within me. And then death, death for me personally is only a transition, just like water is showing me all the time. I've seen and connected to my mum who passed away in 1999, where I've said, Mum, said to the water, can you connect to my mum? And I used to live in Japan, and where Mum and I would write letters to each other, and at the end of every letter she'd attempt to draw her circle, and her circles were terrible, and do a little heart in the middle. And of all of the memories and all of the special moments that my mum and I had, because she was my best friend, the water designed a misshapen heart in the middle. I'm not, and I look at my life right in this moment, and I think it's a good question to ask yourself, right in this moment, because today is a death day for me. And it's like, if I was to die today, would I be happy with what I've done? And I can honestly say that I have. I feel like I have left enough for the world, for people to take over what I'm doing, and to take it far, far further than I have. I feel like I have loved with all of my heart. And that has always been so important to me, that I can feel free enough to be able to love in a way which I've always wanted to be loved. And the ancient Egyptians, they would always say, there was this little thing where they would weigh the heart. Was it and are you as heavy as a feather, or as as light as a feather, or as heavy as the heart? And if your heart was light, that was where you went through. But their question was, have you brought joy, and have you felt joy? Have you given the world joy, and have you experienced joy? Very, very simple questions. And true joy, I think isn't such a temporary feeling. I think of love.
I was speaking over you. Just froze there for a second. I was saying that's one of the best answers I've heard, Veda, in a very long time. You gave me goosebumps when you're talking about, your memories of the ones that passed on and who you are. I was thinking of my dad. I was thinking of his big, thick, strong hands and his smile. So thank you for that. Veda, I think you're a beautiful soul. I mean that. You are a beautiful person. And I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to speak to me. My wife was saying, when are you gonna be back in the house? And I said it was meant to be 7:00. And I'm gonna have to apologize, but I'm gonna tell her I had this amazing conversation with this incredible woman, and I would be honored if at some point later in the year you could come back and talk about salt and whatever else. I could just sit here and listen to you talk all day long. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I mean that. You're amazing, Veda. God bless you, man. Like, you're such a beautiful soul.
I, Ahmed Malik, am a private civilian protected by the Geneva Convention. My Substack, social media posts, and podcasts are my personal experiences, observations, and opinions. This information is for educational purposes only. Although I am a doctor, I am not your doctor, and I am not providing medical or legal advice to you or to the wider public. I am not licensed or registered with the GMC or any other licensing board. The responsibility for the interpretation, due diligence, and use of the information from my Substack and my podcast lies with you, the viewer and or listener. Please do your research and use your discernment. It is not my intention to harass, intimidate, offend, defame, conspire, blackmail, coerce, or cause anxiety, alarm, or distress to any man or woman, and the information presented here is done so with peaceful and honourable intentions. Enjoy, folks.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for showing an interest in the work that I do. I have so many people ask me, how do you do this incredible crystallography? Do you need a microscope? Do you need all this crazy equipment? And the simple answer is no. I do all of my work in my kitchen here. I use glass petri dishes. I do not use a microscope. I use my phone's camera. And this is pretty much all you need, as well as some paper towels. So I am going to start telling you about petri dishes. So I like glass petri dishes as opposed to plastic for a number of reasons. Essentially, glass is made of silica. Silica is a type of crystal, and crystals store vast amounts of information. And this helps the water to store information for longer. Now, glass petri dishes come with a lid. And people will often ask me, do you cover the dishes when it's in the freezer? And the answer is no, I don't like to, for a couple of reasons. So one is very practical. The dish at the top will start to kind of frost over, and then you can't see inside with your main sample to see what it's doing in there. So that's a problem. The other reason is that I get slightly claustrophobic, and so I kind of have this idea that water might not like being covered over, but that's me projecting my own stuff. But I've also found that it's just so much more practical to actually not cover the dishes. So what is the deal with plastic petri dishes? Well, one of the bigger problems I have found is that when you pour the water in, the water kind of opens up in a type of hole. So it's very difficult to completely cover the plastic dish of water with water. So you can have some of that kind of problem in glass dishes, because occasionally you'll get them where there's a bit of a bump in the middle and you can feel them. So this one I can feel there's a bit of a ridge on the edge, but not in the center. And the center is the main problem if you have this kind of a lump, and that will then, the water will open around it. But if that does happen to you, you're still going to get pretty interesting crystallography. You're still going to notice some shapes and forms, and water does something very cool sometimes. So when it does open up, if it's kind of forced to based on the petri dishes, you will find sometimes it opens up into like the shape of a heart, or maybe a flower or an eye or something like that. So it will try and communicate with you in all the best possible ways. So people will often ask me, do I need a dedicated freezer or like a totally empty shelf in there for this? Well, I have children and stuff, and so my freezers are not empty. I have had the privilege years ago of having empty freezers and doing this work solely in that freezer, and that was really great. But real life is real life, and that's not always practical. So I can reassure you that whatever is in your freezer is not going to influence the water, because anything that is frozen is essentially in a state of suspension. So don't worry about that. Now, people do get very concerned about other things influencing the water. Because one thing I guess we've recognized is that water in its liquid state is very much in a kind of chaotic state. It's updating its information every trillionth of a second. And so what we're doing is we're wanting to capture the first freeze. Now, what's the first freeze? So as water begins to freeze, you will see that it will start to have, there will be a liquid on top and there'll be ice on the bottom. And that's what I call the first freeze. Now, if that water was left longer and there would be a second layer that would freeze, and water creates this kind of scaffolding between the two, and there would be liquid water in between. And that's actually a really interesting thing to see. So if you were to put too much water in your Petri dish, for example, I'll show you what too much looks like. I haven't even shown you what the right amount is yet, but I will in a minute. So filling your Petri dish up halfway is way too much water. But if you do that and you freeze it for around 15 to 18 minutes, what you will find is that there will be a liquid water in between two layers of ice. And when you tip it, that liquid water will drain away and you'll see what those two layers look like. And that can be really fun because you can actually crack the top layer with your finger and you see how thin the ice slices are, and you can also see what's going on in there. Now, that secondary information, that is the water that froze on the top, that's the kind of liquid water that is on top of the first freeze. So I'm going to show you how much water we do want. I'm going to tip my camera down here. I have I'll just move all of these dishes over here for now. Okay. Now this is just a small dish, just so you can see. Sometimes that can be kind of fun to use, but I wouldn't recommend anything smaller than this. This is a 9 centimeter diameter Petri dish. You can see it's just a little bit bigger than my hand. This is my ideal size. You can get bigger, but I wouldn't get any smaller than this. It's approximately a 6 centimeter diameter Petri dish. So we have some water here in this little flask cup that I was given. So 1 tablespoon, 2 tablespoons of water, and that is all we need. Now, that is assuming that you have the same size dish as me. Now, if you have a small one, for example, like this is probably only going to need about 1 of these. And you can shake it. And now, what's good about this, and hopefully you can see it perhaps, is that, I don't know if you can see here, there is it's starting to open up. There's, it's starting to all open up and move. So it's, how can I make it so you can see it? Hopefully you can. It's opened all the way up here. So this dish has a bit of a bump in the middle. So what we're going to have to do is add a little bit more water to it to try and get that to cover and shake it over like this. So where there's a will, there is a way. So this is the right amount of water that you want. So as I hold it up, you might notice that here is the very base of the dish, and only a couple of millimeters above it is the water. So when you tip it, there should be a large space behind it and it's not all falling out. Now I will, with the larger amount of water one, when you tip it, it would all fall out. So this is a really good indicator of how much is the right amount. So it should just cover the dish at the bottom. So I'll just tip myself up here. Okay, so the next step is that you are going to want to inspire the water. Now, in the very, very early stages of this work, I always recommend that people don't launch into expecting water to design your face or anything around it or any of these things. Like, that expectation is not an ideal way to start this work. The best way to start this work is just to stay curious. Invite water to share its journey with you. And by that, I'm talking about start to observe its signature patterns. So what is a signature pattern? Well, each type of water has a signature pattern. For example, municipal tap water tends to form disordered lines and sort of more jagged kind of designs. It doesn't create hexagonal patterns, for example, like spring water would. And the patterns of rainwater, they tend to kind of look like a slightly curved fan. There is a lot of different patterns that I've identified, but you will identify the common patterns in your water if you keep using it. Now, the advantage of knowing what the natural patterns of your water are is that when it does something different, it's going to be obvious. Now, it's still amazing to me after looking at signature patterns for so long that water can kind of go out of its original blueprint, I suppose, of these common patterns and design something extraordinary. So water can communicate in two ways. I always say that art is the heart of water, but water can also communicate in something that I call hydroglyphs. Now, that's been something I've studied for the last 4 years, and essentially, a hydroglyph is a repeated symbol in ice that I've identified and that relates to a word. So water doesn't read words, it reads the energy of words, which is why it's not limited to different languages or symbols. So to say I have one hydroglyph, I have to have seen the same image appear at least 50 times using the same word. So that is a whole another thing, but it's important to learn about hydroglyphs, I believe, when doing this work, because water may be communicating to you in this very advanced kind of symbolic conceptual language as opposed to designing art. So I think if you are really wanting to dive into this work, I really recommend getting the PDF of all the different hydroglyphs that I've identified so far and learning more about them. Okay, so that was a very long-winded way of talking about getting started with this freezing technique. Now, when we put it in the freezer, my freezer setting is, I think it's around about -18. So my ideal setting is -23. But the time frame for the freezing tends to be fairly standard for most regular freezers that aren't too old, which is around 5 minutes and 20 seconds. Now that's how long I'm going to put my timer on for when I put this sample in there. Now, when you do it, and because everybody's freezer is different, what are we looking for? We are looking for liquid on top and ice underneath. Now, how do we see that? Well, you can usually see that with your naked eye, but a handy tip is if you do have a torch like this on your phone, without touching the sample, you can shine it in, and when it's in the freezer, and you will have a much clearer view of what's going on in there. Now, if you look in there and you see it's still totally liquid, don't touch it, shut your freezer and put the timer on for 2 more minutes and keep doing that until you see that there is liquid on top and ice underneath. Now, I'm going to keep talking whilst this sample is freezing, because I do want to talk about what's going on in there. So I'm going to pop this in the freezer and I'm going to put my timer on, and I'm going to talk about what we're going to do next once we pull it out of the freezer. Okay. Right, so that's in there. Now I'm going to do exactly what you are going to do and put my timer on for 5 minutes and 20 seconds as it's going down. So while we're waiting, I want to talk about what we're going to do once we pull it out. Now, it's really important to not forget this one step. In our enthusiasm, it's very easy to miss this. when we pull the dish out, what we're going to do is, firstly, we're going to tip the liquid water out. Now, what's really good thing to do is to tip it into another Petri dish. I'll just tip that one out. So you pour that excess water into another Petri dish, and you can actually freeze that sample, because that is the secondary layer of information. So what we're then going to do is wipe the bottom with a handy towel. We call them handy towels, but I think you call them paper towels in the States, if that's where you're from. And that is a really important step. It's going to make sure that you can see the crystallography really clearly, really well, that there's no frost on the bottom. Now, when you photograph your ice, what you're going to do is, I just have a regular iPhone. There's nothing special particularly about it. It has a ×1 setting and a 2.5 setting. So I always like to take one backed out photo of the crystallography, and then you push the slightly zoomed in one, and you take photos of things that you find interesting in there. So here's what we don't want to forget to do. What we don't want to forget to do is to take the photos. That seems crazy that I should have to remind you of that, but sometimes it can be so incredibly interesting that we can go forget to take the photos. And so the water, or the ice, sorry, it melts really fast. And you have a very small window of opportunity of taking the photos. So take the photos first and then go through them later. And you'll see that your camera can pick up so much more information than our eyes can, because you can zoom in and see what's in there. And that's my favorite part. So I think that that is definitely something that a lot of people can get caught out on, but even I do. I get like caught up in the beauty of something, and then I forget to take the photos. So that is just a little bit of troubleshooting there. Now, it's really interesting doing this work, because you don't have to be limited to freezing water. You can freeze wine, for example. You can freeze brewed coffee. That's a really interesting one, because you can see a big difference between instant coffee compared to really great coffee. And the structures are really different. It's very similar to the differences between tap water and spring water, although coffee tends to take on more of a look of the egg albumin that I freeze sometimes. So it's a really fun one to do, and you can try all different kinds of things. Some people that are interested in bodily fluids, they like to do this technique with their urine, and it's actually a wonderful way to see what's going on inside of you. You might see patterns that resemble some hydroglyphs. You might see patterns that resemble beautiful, healthy spring water. I remember talking to somebody that sent me some amazing pictures of frozen urine, and I thought I would never say anything like this in my life if you'd asked me, like, I don't know, 15 years ago. But I said, oh my God, that's the best looking urine I've ever seen in my life. And you get, it just had so many incredible hexagons in the urine. And I've tracked my cycle using this process with urine, and I've seen specific patterns that appear in the early part of my cycle, specific patterns during the fertile stage, and specific patterns just before I get my period. So it's actually a really interesting thing to do. You can even spit into the Petri dishes, and you can see some interesting things going on in there. It's usually there's some crystallography, or some patterns will form on the bubbles of the saliva, and that can be very telling, really interesting. I'm just wondering how I've got 30 seconds left here. And so once I was talking to somebody about the number 8, and number 8 was the last word I spoke. And when I spat into the Petri dish and I photographed the saliva afterwards, there was like number 8. It was almost like it was stamped in the middle of the bubble, which is really suggesting that even our saliva it's picking up the last word we spoke. Well, there goes my timer. So I'll just go and get my camera ready straight away and pull it out. So this is wonderful because this gives you a little bit of an indication of also what my signature pattern of my water looks like. So hopefully you can see that there is liquid and you can see the crystallography there. Now I'm going to pour the liquid into my Petri dish here, and I've already wiped the bottom. I'll give it a little wipe again. Now what you should be able to see here is the crystallography of that fanning pattern. That's the beautiful crystallography of my tank water from all the rain we've got in New Zealand. Now I'm going to take a photo. So you take a backed out photo. You don't want it to be too much in the light. Now what we want to do is take some more closed in photos. Now it's warm in here, so my ice is melting quickly. Now, it's really as simple as that. So I'm going to show you the backed out photo and then these zoomed in photos here. So that's it. That's as simple as it is. Now it's just about identifying the liquid on top and the ice underneath. And again, if you are doing this and your freezer is a little bit old, or it's just on a low, not on the lowest setting, then it could take between 5 minutes all the way up to even 12 minutes for some people. When you do open the freezer door, what happens is that the more you go in there to check on the sample, it can make it take a little bit longer, but you just factor that into the timing. When you do find that it's frozen at the right stage, you can kind of go, oh, well, I opened the freezer, so maybe take off a minute. So you can play with it. Even my sample here, it probably could have used potentially another 10 to 15 seconds. So the water is actually liquid for a long time, and it kind of does this thing where all of a sudden it rips into action and it will freeze within about 30 seconds. So a really fun thing that can happen sometimes if you open the freezer and you can actually see it doing it. And you can see how fast it's moving in the freezer and how fast it's freezing. It's absolutely fascinating. Now, as far as anything else, any other tips go, I think that it's important to talk about relationship. So I have formed a relationship over these years with water where I can basically think about something I want to do, and I really feel like water already knows what I'm asking it. So I'm at this kind of stage now where I can think of something and I don't really even need to say, for example, say we're going to use the spoon as an influence, and say I might put the water over the spoon, for example, and I might do that for 30 seconds. And I have used that 30-second number for a long time because it's not too long, it's not too short, it always feels about right. But now I feel like I don't really need to even do that protocol because I feel like my relationship has become almost psychic with water. And I'm very interested also in what water has to share with me. I have seen thousands of pictures of water showing me what is in its immediate vicinity or what I'm showing it, but I've also seen water do exactly not what I'm expecting. And I think that that's one of the really fun things, is that the moment we expect water to do something, it will show us that it can do its own thing. So it is very spontaneous sometimes, and it will teach us things about ourselves. So often what we're seeing in the ice is a reflection of what's going on inside of us. I had someone once tell me that they were asking the water to show it some tulips. They were using an influence of a tulip flower. But all that week, this lady had been worried about her dogs. One of her dogs had passed away, and the other dog was in the world but was sick. And so she was super worried about her dogs. And they were very specific looking. One was an Afghan dog, and one was a whippet. And they had these kind of long noses. And so as she was doing the work, thinking that she might see a tulip, she was so shocked because what she saw were two dogs in the ice, and you can see these amazing long noses, you can see their shapes, and one dog was kind of on top of the other one, and it was really showing that this kind of one was in spirit and one was here. And it was so significant to her because all week she'd been just worried about her dog and thinking about her other dog. And she said to me, well, why didn't water show me a tulip? And I said, because water doesn't do small talk. Water isn't just interested in what and proving to you that it can store information. It wants you to know that you are seen, that what matters to you is being observed and seen. And water I have found to be extremely compassionate. And one of the wonderful things that I've also observed is that water is never in judgment. Water is more of an observer. And so it also is resonating at a high frequency. So if you are feeling frustrated or angry, water isn't judging you, but water won't resonate or do any of this work with you in that kind of mindset. You don't have to be in your Zen space. You don't have to have like a perfect, like clean house with incense and like candles going or any of these kinds of things. You don't need all that. What you need is a genuine relationship. You need to set a foundation of intention. Intention is so important, which I get into a lot in my more advanced work. Intention really is so powerful that the water it's like a direct connection with water. So we can have all these different thoughts come up in our head and we can be worried, oh my God, what if I'm thinking about this? And water picks up on that. And set your intention. Don't worry so much. Have fun with this. Just stay curious. And water will find a way to communicate with you. Like I have said, I really recommend you learn about hydroglyphs, because if you're not seeing imagery the way you kind of see me getting it, then it might very, very well be that water is communicating with you in this other way. And so don't feel disheartened. I have found that water is incredibly compassionate, but it is also very much a spiritual teacher for me. And in the times where I have needed to let go of some of my control stuff, water forces me to do that, because I realize that water is wild and she doesn't want to be controlled, nor do any of us. So there are so many similarities between the water outside of us and the water within us. So I will leave it there. Hopefully you feel confident that going forward you know how to do this technique. If you ever see repeated patterns in your ice and they are different than any I've seen in my hydroglyphs, or you just find them really interesting, please email me. I would love to hear about that. And you can contact me through the contacts page on my website. So showering you all in lots of love. See you later. Bye.